She was just a black maid. Until she answered in Russian and left the millionaire mesmerized. Before the story begins, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you love intense love stories with twists, overcoming obstacles and heartwarming endings, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any stories, and you'll also help this project grow and reach more people. Are you with us? Today's story is unmissable. The sound of the vacuum cleaner echoed through the luxurious halls of the Grand Aurora Hotel, muffling the subtle sound of heels and refined conversations crossing the white marble lobby. The mirrored walls reflected the glow of the golden chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, and everything there seemed impeccably clean, as if the lives of the rich didn't gather dust. Zoe Johnson, 29 years old, went unnoticed among the guests, hurrying by with expensive luggage and rehearsed smiles. Black, with dark skin and curly hair tied in a tight bun under her uniform cap, she was just another element of the scenery, like the orchid vases or the imported rugs. Her gaze was calm and attentive, and her hands, though accustomed to cleaning, hid a quiet strength that came from carrying more than cleaning supplies. She carried stories, diplomas, dreams. As she patiently scrubbed the floor near the reception desk, the phone vibrating in her coat pocket made her freeze. She knew it was forbidden to use the phone during work hours, especially after Mr. Richards, the manager, had given a strict warning at the last meeting. But the number on the screen made her take a deep breath. It was from the university. After 6 failed attempts to get the much-dreamed-of master's scholarship in linguistics, Zoe knew this call couldn't be ignored. She discreetly looked around. The lobby was crowded, guests laughing, waiters passing by with crystal trays, and 2 security guards near the entrance. The manager hadn't come down yet. With light steps, she moved a few meters away and hid behind a carved marble column, trying to disappear into the architecture. She answered in a low voice. "Hello, Zoe Johnson speaking." A voice answered on the other end, in fluent, formal, and direct Russian. It took Zoe half a second to process it. Then she responded in the same language, with absolute precision. Her tone was firm, elegant, with the pronunciation of someone who had studied and practiced for years. The words flowed as if they were natural, as if the Russian language had been her second skin, and not a challenge she faced alone in the silent nights of Chicago's South Side, studying with free YouTube videos and borrowed public library books. The dialogue went on for a few minutes, with academic terms, dates, and requirements for the selection process. Zoe made small notes on a crumpled piece of paper she kept in her pocket. Her eyes shone with a timid, restrained hope, like someone who had learned not to expect too much. But on the other side of the lobby, a man was watching her attentively. Nicholas Roman Volkov was sitting in a leather armchair near the decorative fireplace, reviewing papers while waiting for a meeting with Russian investors. Tall, very fair-skinned, with perfectly styled ash-blonde hair, he looked sculpted to belong to that place. His greyish-blue eyes, accustomed to distrust and control, were fixed on the sound of the language he had heard since childhood, but didn't expect to hear. He slowly stood up, intrigued, and got close enough to catch part of the conversation. "Yes, I received the letter from Professor Van Houten, and I'm ready for the interview," Zoe said with a slight smile on her lips, her voice almost a whisper. Nicholas frowned, astonished. The pronunciation was flawless. Every accent, every pause. This wasn't a tourist showing off a memorized language. This was someone speaking with mastery, and that someone was the woman few there even noticed. Zoe hung up and quickly put away the phone. When she turned around, she came face to face with Nicholas's piercing gaze, watching her as if he had seen a ghost, or a rare piece out of place. She stood still for a second. Where did you learn Russian? The question came sharp, direct in Russian. Zoe hesitated, but answered with the same firmness. At Georgetown University, and by myself. Depends on the phase of life. Nicholas kept his eyes on her. He was surprised, fascinated, disconcerted. But before he could continue, Manager Richards appeared from the elevator. When he saw Zoe standing there, with the magnate just a few feet away, his face changed color. Zoe, what do you think you're doing outside your sector? Get back immediately, and we'll talk in my office later. She lowered her eyes. She said nothing, just took a deep breath, picked up the bucket and cloth, and walked back as if that conversation had never happened. But someone had listened, and that someone would never see her the same way again. Zoe went back to work with her heart tight, feeling Nicholas's gaze still fixed on her back. There was something in that silent encounter she couldn't decipher, but she didn't have time to think much. As soon as she crossed the hallway to the service elevators, she heard her name being called in a dry tone. Zoe Johnson in my office, now. It was Mr. Richards, a middle-aged white man, narrow-faced, grey hair slicked with gel, always wearing a tie that was a bit too tight. His tone left no room for questioning. He held a clipboard with the same rigidity as his convictions. Zoe followed him in silence, her head held high but her shoulders tense. His office was cold, windowless. The walls were a lifeless beige, and there was a faint smell of old coffee and damp paper. Richard sat behind the desk with a stern expression, as if about to conduct a moral trial. You know why you're here? He asked, without looking directly at her. Zoe took a deep breath. I believe it's because I answered a phone call. During your shift, he confirmed, flipping through a report. You left the cleaning area, answered the phone, and had a prolonged conversation. That's abandonment of post. It was a call from the university, she explained firmly, and it lasted less than 3 minutes. Richard slowly raised his eyes, as if examining a rare insect. In Russian? Yes. And since when do you speak Russian? Since I was 22. I taught myself, then studied at the university. He leaned back in his chair, squinting. You know what it looks like, Zoe? Looks like you wanted to impress someone. Maybe a certain billionaire guest. Zoe felt her blood heat up, but held her composure. That wasn't the reason. You want to stand out. Show that you're better than the other employees. But here, no one is above the position they hold. She swallowed hard. Through the glass window of the door, she could see 2 white waiters on their phones, laughing at something while waiting for the elevator. Then why can they use their phones and I can't? She asked calmly, discreetly pointing. Richards gave a short, forced smile. They were in the hallway. You weren't. And you're not a waitress. You're a maid. He grabbed a form, quickly signed it, and pushed it in her direction. Suspended for 3 days. No pay. Consider this a warning. Next time, it could be your termination. Zoe stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't show weakness. Understood. When she left the office, she walked through the hallways with firm steps. The lobby seemed even more opulent at that moment, as if it wanted to remind her she didn't belong there. The humiliation hurt, but there was something stronger inside her, the certainty that she hadn't done anything wrong. As she stepped out through the service door, Chicago's cold air cut her face. She paused for a moment and looked up at the grey sky. The scholarship dream, her fluent Russian, the diploma stored at the back of the drawer. It all seemed insignificant at that moment. But still, she whispered to herself, they don't know what they're throwing away. She didn't know it yet, but that act of speaking the truth, even while being punished, had already planted the seed of something much bigger. And someone, behind the mirrored windows of the hotel, was still watching her, mind restless, pride shaken. Nicholas Volkov was not a man easily impressed, but Zoe Johnson had done exactly that. And that was just the beginning. 2 days had passed since the suspension. The reduced paycheck meant less food in the pantry and more overtime hours at the neighborhood's community laundry where Zoe lived, in Chicago's South Side. She had spent the previous night rewriting her motivation letter for the scholarship at the University of Amsterdam. Even with no guarantees, she kept trying. On that cold Wednesday morning, still with wet feet from the rain that soaked the bus stop, she received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was firm, steady, with a subtle Russian accent. "Zoe Johnson, this is Ivan, assistant to Mr. Nicholas Volkov. He would like to see you, today, at 11 a.m. at the Grand Aurora." Zoe was silent for a moment. I've been suspended." "He didn't ask that. He just requested your presence." The call ended soon after. Zoe stood still on the sidewalk for a few seconds. Her heart was racing, but she couldn't tell if it was fear, curiosity, or plain exhaustion. At the Grand Aurora's reception, the looks were different. The colleagues who used to pretend she didn't exist were now whispering. She wasn't wearing a uniform this time. She had on a simple navy blue blouse and black pants, the only well-pressed outfit she had left. Her hair was down, curly and damp from the drizzle. Insecurity tried to take over, but she stood tall. Ivan took her to the top floor, where the presidential suite was. The doors opened to a silent, minimalist room with floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealing the cloudy city below. Nicholas stood facing the view, holding a cup of black coffee. His dark grey suit was impeccable, but when his eyes turned to Zoe, they were less harsh than the last time. "Thank you for coming," he said bluntly, without smiling. She nodded. "I got the message. I thought it was a mistake." "It wasn't. Sit down." She obeyed, taking her time. Nicholas walked to a side table, picked up a tablet, and placed it in front of her. "Read this." In Russian. Zoe looked at the screen. It was a dense excerpt from a business proposal on real estate partnerships between Russian and American companies. She read it aloud, with fluency, natural rhythm, and clarity, without stumbling. Nicholas watched her. Each word seemed to strip away a layer of doubt he had carried since the day he saw her hiding behind the column, answering that phone call. "Now in German," he said. She translated. Then, without being asked, she did the same in French. "Did you memorize this?" he asked. Zoe looked him straight in the eyes. "No, I understood it." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. There was something new in his expression. Not a smile, but not indifference either. It was attention, curiosity. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years. "And no one ever knew this?" She gave a faint, ironic smile. "No one ever asked." Nicholas was silent for a few seconds. "How many languages do you speak?" 6. "English, Spanish, French, Russian, German, and a bit of Dutch." "Education?" "Degree in linguistics from Georgetown University. On scholarship. I graduated in 2018. He blinked slowly, as if processing each piece of information like a security code that had just been cracked. "And why are you cleaning hotel floors?" Zoe took a deep breath. Because speaking 6 languages was never enough to pay the bills. Nicholas stood up and walked back to the window. He stood with his back to her for a few seconds. "I have a conference in 3 days. Russian and American investors. I need someone discreet, efficient, and who can translate nuances that even Google wouldn't catch." She looked at him, serious. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering a temporary contract, interpreter for a week, then we'll see." Zoe slowly crossed her legs, keeping her gaze steady. And why me? Why now? Nicholas turned around. Out of curiosity. She almost smiled, but held it back. Curiosity is dangerous. It can take you places you can't control. He stared at the woman who, until recently, had been invisible to everyone's eyes. I'm already in that place, and you're part of it now. Zoe nodded. Inside, a part of her was trembling, but on the outside, she was nothing but dignity. This would be the first time Nicholas Volkov entrusted his public image to someone outside his circle. And Zoe, for the first time, would have the chance to show everything the world had ignored. But neither of them had any idea what was about to be revealed, and what started as curiosity wouldn't end as a simple contract. On the morning of the conference, Zoe woke up before sunrise. The room she lived in still smelled of old coffee and the mildew of damp walls, but she kept everything clean with what little she had. Hanging on the kitchen chair was the only blazer she had managed to borrow from a neighbor. She put it on carefully, tied her curls into an elegant bun, and applied a discreet lipstick. It wasn't vanity. It was protection. When she arrived at the Grand Aurora, the staff's stares seemed to pierce her. The former maid was now climbing the executive wing stairs, led by Ivan, Nicholas Volkov's personal assistant, to serve as the official interpreter for the most important week in the Russian-American business calendar. The hotel's golden ballroom, used only for gala banquets and diplomatic events, was decorated with French crystal chandeliers, mirrored columns, and floral arrangements in pale shades of pink and cream. Men in suits and women in haute couture dresses filled the room as if they owned the world, and, in a way, they did. Zoe entered with a serene posture, but her stomach was churning, not from fear, but from remembering that just weeks before, she had been polishing that very floor. "Who's that?" murmured a blonde woman in the back, holding a glass of champagne. Irina Petrovna, Nicholas's fiancée, crossed the room with her stiletto heels echoing with forced elegance. Tall, very fair skin, light blonde hair in wide waves, blue eyes that never blinked. She looked flawless, like a porcelain doll from an expensive window display. She stopped in front of Zoe with a sharp smile. "You're the new interpreter?" Zoe nodded slightly. "Yes, Zoe Johnson." Irina stared at her for a few seconds, her eyes scanning every detail, as if examining a stain on an expensive dress. "Interesting," she said with disdain. Nicholas always had peculiar taste. "You have an exotic look." Zoe kept her gaze calm. Exotic is a word used when someone doesn't fit others' expectations. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Irina gave a brief smile but didn't reply. She simply walked away, as if Zoe wasn't worth the effort. Throughout the event, Zoe stayed close to Nicholas, translating every technical term and cultural nuance between the businessmen with precision. She switched between languages swiftly, becoming a bridge between worlds that pretended to be alike but treated each other with disguised mistrust. At one point, a Russian executive interrupted her with a loud comment. "You have an accent, but you speak better than many professional translators." Zoe thanked him with a slight smile. Sometimes those who speak from the heart understand better than those who speak from the dictionary. Nicholas watched everything. He didn't say much, but his eyes never left her. Zoe didn't fit there, but she didn't try to. She simply did her job, with competence, dignity, and a kind of presence that slowly silenced the subtle mockery around her. At the end of the night, Irina approached Nicholas with a venomous tone in her voice. "You really trust her? You barely know her." Nicholas replied without turning his face. "I don't need to know her. I just need someone who tells the truth." Irina swallowed hard, but kept her smile. In the car, on the way home, Zoe rested her head against the window and closed her eyes for a moment. She was exhausted, but something inside her was growing. It wasn't pride. It was belonging. She didn't have to prove anything anymore. She was indispensable, and they knew it. But what she didn't know yet was that her talent was about to bother people far more powerful than Irina, and that the line between recognition and threat was thinner than it seemed. The morning after the event, Zoe arrived early at the hotel. The ballroom was silent, still carrying the light scent of the previous night's flowers. She felt more confident, almost acknowledged. All week, she had proven her worth with dedication, precision, and balance. But something inside her remained on alert, as if she sensed that world wasn't built on the same sense of justice she carried in her heart. It was during a break between meetings that everything began to crumble. She was walking through the administrative wing's hallways, carrying documents Nicholas had requested. As she approached the reserved meeting room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. She stopped for a moment when she heard familiar voices. "If we keep this up, the frozen Russian properties will move into the American holding without raising suspicion," said a deep voice. It was Nicholas's lawyer, Mr. Bradford, a man in an expensive suit, always with a smile that was too professional. "As long as Nicholas keeps signing without reading the details, the plan remains perfect," added Irina, her voice sweet as honey, but dripping with cynicism. Zoe leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She knew this was more than immoral. It was a crime. And Nicholas, even if unknowingly, was the central piece. Without thinking much, she slipped her hand into her pocket and pressed the record button on her phone. Her fingers trembled, but she kept the phone close to her body, hidden under the scarf she wore around her neck. She recorded everything: dates, company names, bank account numbers opened in tax havens. When the conversation ended, she quietly walked away, struggling to breathe. She went straight to Nicholas's office. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing reports. Zoe entered without knocking. Her eyes were moist, but her voice was steady. "I need to talk to you. Now." Nicholas looked up, surprised by her tone. "What happened?" "It's about the meeting between Irina and your lawyer. I heard it. They're using your name in a money laundering scheme with blocked Russian properties." Nicholas set the papers aside, his expression slowly changing. "Are you accusing me of being an accomplice to a crime?" "No. I'm trying to stop you from being used. I recorded the conversation. You need to hear it." She extended the phone, but Nicholas didn't move. His eyes hardened. "Why were you spying? Are you trying to blackmail me? Is that it?" Zoe stood still. "No, I overheard it by accident, recorded on instinct. You have to believe me." He stood up, tall and imposing. The room seemed to shrink around her. "You know what I see? A resentful woman. Someone who grew up with less and is now bitter because she can't have what others do. That's it, right? You want to climb up and found a shortcut." Zoe took a step back, offended, but remained firm. "This isn't about climbing up. It's about the truth." "Keep your truth," he said, pointing at the door. "You're done, and take this show with you." The door opened as Ivan arrived, summoned by the intercom. Not understanding what was happening, he looked at her with pity. Zoe left the room, under the stares of some executives gathered in the hallway. None of them said a word, not even a nod. It was as if, suddenly, she had gone back to being what everyone assumed from the beginning: the maid who dared to climb too high. Outside, the sky was starting to darken even though it was mid-afternoon. Zoe walked down the hotel steps slowly, but her heart was on fire. She had done the right thing, and was punished for it. She was still holding her phone in her hands. Inside it was something that could destroy everything, but also save it. Zoe vanished like someone erasing themselves from their own story. No warning, no explanation. She disappeared from the neighborhood, from social media, from the halls of the Grand Aurora. Even the colleagues who used to ignore her started asking about her in hushed tones, as if her absence had left a silent wound in the hotel. In the first week, Nicholas said nothing. He went on with his commitments, refusing to even think about that argument. But at night, in his silent penthouse, something bothered him. And it wasn't guilt. It was doubt. There was something in Zoe's eyes that day, something he had tried to ignore. On the 12th day, a piece of mail arrived at his holdings headquarters, addressed directly to his name, with no sender. A plain white envelope, without any logo. Nicholas opened it. Inside, a flash drive. That same day, the FBI received the same material, but with a full dossier attached. Audio clips in Russian and English, detailed transcripts, dates, bank records, and scanned contracts. Irina's name, and the lawyer Bradford's, appeared on every page. Nicholas's name, innocent in actions but present in signatures, was there too. 2 hours later, federal agents discreetly entered the Grand Aurora. There was no commotion, but the stares grew heavier. When Irina learned of the operation, she tried to call Nicholas. He didn't answer. The next day, she boarded a private flight to Switzerland and never came back. The scandal hit the media like a silent bomb. No reporter mentioned Zoe. No headlines cited her name, but the evidence came from the inside with too much precision to be the work of an outsider. The hotel was caught up in the investigations. Manager Mr. Richards, pressured by complaints of harassment and discrimination, was temporarily removed. But among the employees, the word most spoken in the halls was just one: justice. Nicholas was summoned to testify. He sat before the agents with heavy shoulders, but for the first time, without arrogance. He listened to every recording, read every page. At the end, he asked to be alone in the room for a minute. He closed his eyes. Zoe. The woman he fired in front of everyone, the one he accused of jealousy, the one he called resentful. And she was the one who saved him. From that point on, Nicholas disappeared from public events, cancelled dinners, suspended trips, but not out of shame. It was as if something in him had been ripped out by force, and now he was forced to see himself under a harsh light he always avoided. At the company headquarters, his advisors demanded explanations. Investors wanted guarantees. But Nicholas only repeated one sentence. She told me the truth, and I didn't listen. One night, while digging through his personal files, he found a folded piece of paper. It was Zoe's resume. Simple, printed in black and white. At the bottom of the page, in small handwritten letters, was a phrase he had never noticed before. To understand is the deepest form of respect. Nicholas leaned back in his leather chair, ran his hand over his face, and sat there in silence, as if learning to breathe again. On the other side of the city, in a modest room at the public library, Zoe was typing with focus on one of the old computers. A hood covered her hair and headphones muffled the background noise. She read about the progress of the investigations without identifying herself. She was alive, she was whole, and even wounded, she still believed that the truth needed to be told, even when no one wanted to hear it. But that was just the first part of what she was still willing to do. Winter in Chicago was still punishing the old rooftops of the South Side, but inside the small room 312 of William Harper High School, there was warmth. Not just from the old heater that made more noise than heat, but from the sparkle in the eyes of the students sitting in crooked rows, attentive to the woman standing at the whiteboard. Zoe wrote the word Dobro Pajalovat in blue chalk, then turned to the class. Anyone want to guess what it means? A boy in the middle row raised his hand. It's welcome, right? Zoe smiled. Very good, Malik. Welcome. And now, kto wy? There was a moment of silence. She walked among the desks, as if sowing trust along the way. It means, who are you? She explained softly. And the answer doesn't have to come just in Russian. It can come from within. The words hung in the air, deeper than grammar would allow. Zoe was now a language and cultural expression teacher at the public school she had attended years before. The same red brick building, the same bulletin board with crumpled posters at the entrance. But now there was a new serenity in her, a firmness that didn't shout. It just existed. She wore simple but elegant clothes, neutral cotton shirts, discreet shoes. Her curls were loose and well cared for. Her face showed signs of sleepless nights, but also of purpose. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it touched deeply. Months had passed since the Grand Aurora scandal. She never spoke to Nicholas again. She never returned to the hotel. But now and then, she received formal letters from companies in Europe, one from Paris, another from Amsterdam, offering jobs, scholarships, invitations to conferences. Zoe always replied with gratitude but declined. She preferred to be there, with her people, where no one pretended she was invisible, where Black and Latino youths looked at her and saw more than a teacher. They saw a mirror of hope. One morning, after finishing a class, a student named Camila approached, her eyes shining. Miss Zoe, my mum wants me to work as a cashier at the supermarket. She says studying languages won't get me anywhere. Zoe knelt down to meet her eye level. Tell your mom I spoke 6 languages before anyone ever paid me for it. And keep learning anyway, because the world is way too big for you to only speak the language of fear. Camila nodded, biting her lip to hold back tears. Zoe hugged her gently. That's who she was now, present, quiet. But every gesture of hers was planting roots in the students, in the community, in the city. Slowly, reports started mentioning her as an educational reference. Academic groups began citing her as an emerging talent in applied linguistics for basic education. But she didn't let the praise distract her. Recognition doesn't interest me, she would say to the school principal when interview requests came. What matters is that someone learns to listen and to speak with truth. At the end of the day, Zoe always left the building with a book in her hands, headphones on, and her eyes alert to the corners of the neighborhood where she grew up. She had disappeared from the elite's radar, but had become a beacon for a place still forgotten by everyone else. On the other side of the city, though, someone still remembered her, and couldn't forget the sound of her voice. That cold Thursday night, the small auditorium of Chicago's Central Library was packed. Young students, teachers, activists, and community educators filled every wooden seat, paying attention to the event poster on the wall, the sound of invisibility, language, identity, and belonging in modern America. On the simple stage, without fancy microphones or lighting effects, Zoe adjusted her binder in her hands with the serenity of someone who no longer needed to prove who she was. She wore a burgundy turtleneck, black pants, discreet earrings. Her hair was elegantly tied up. Her posture was firm but calm, carrying the weight of someone who had been silenced for years and was now speaking not to show off, but to liberate. The audience quieted when she began. I grew up hearing that I had a beautiful voice, but for a long time, it was only heard when I repeated what others wanted to hear. Some faces leaned in with attention. Zoe walked slowly across the stage, her eyes meeting those of teenagers and elders, Latinos, black, white, people who knew silence not as the absence of sound, but as the absence of being heard. At some point in life, I realized that being invisible is not the same as being forgotten. Invisible is when you're present, but no one recognizes your worth. Invisible is when your resume is ignored, but your mistakes are remembered. Invisible is when your voice is only respected if it speaks the right language, the language of the elite, the language of power. A subtle murmur spread among the audience. She continued, "But I learned one thing. And I want you to remember this. Truth has its own sound, and it keeps speaking, even when no one is listening." Sitting in the back row, in a dark suit, eyes fixed, hands clasped in his lap, was Nicholas Volkov. Almost unrecognizable. No security, no designer watch, no arrogant look like months before. He watched in silence, his eyes brimming. Every word Zoe spoke was a mirror, and every mirror hurt more than the last. At the end of the lecture, the applause was restrained. It was as if the audience respected the weight of it all, without needing fanfare. Zoe thanked them with a simple nod and began gathering her papers. That's when she saw him. Nicholas approached slowly, hesitant steps. He stopped a few feet from her, like someone who was no longer sure of anything, except that he needed to be there. "Zoe," he said in a low, almost fragile voice, "I didn't come here out of arrogance. I just needed to listen, without defending myself." She looked at him calmly. There was no surprise, no anger. There was maturity. "You only heard me when I spoke your language," she answered softly. "But I always spoke the truth." Nicholas lowered his eyes, bearing the weight of those words. He nodded. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest, filled with everything that no longer needed to be said. He didn't apologize with empty speeches. He didn't make promises. He simply extended his hand without hurry. "Thank you," he said, "for doing what I didn't deserve." Zoe lightly shook his hand for a second, then went back to gathering her papers. Nicholas respected the gesture. He stepped back and left through the crowd, unnoticed. She stayed there, standing on the empty stage, taking a deep breath. Something had ended, but something else was just beginning. Weeks after the lecture, Zoe carried on with her routine in the same simplicity as always. She kept teaching in the South Side, walking familiar streets with a book in her bag, and her head full of plans she rarely said out loud. She was a woman at peace, but not standing still. One morning, as she left the teacher's lounge, she got an unexpected call. The voice was familiar, but it now sounded different, less imposing, more humble. "Zoe, good morning. It's Nicholas." She stopped in the middle of the hallway, the sound of a bell in the background interrupted by surprise. "Good morning. I'm starting a foundation, an educational project. I want to present it to you. But before that, I want you to know it only exists because you exist." Zoe didn't answer right away. She just closed her eyes for a second, as if weighing whether it was worth returning to a place she had been expelled from, even if through a new door. At the end of that week, she boarded a flight to New York. The building was discreet, modern architecture, glass walls, and a view of the Hudson. Inside, a small group of professionals awaited her. Nicholas presented the project, a scholarship program for Black, Latino, and multilingual immigrant youth, focusing on international education, exchanges, and psychosocial support. "I want this project to reach where the system doesn't," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "And I want you to lead it." Zoe read in silence. Her heart was steady, but her mind was sharp. Every clause, every company name involved, every promise. She looked up. "If we're going to do this, it's going to be my way." Nicholas nodded. "That's exactly what I hope to hear," she continued. "I want total transparency, a diverse selection committee, real representation, not for show. And I don't want your name on golden plaques. I want the priority to be the youth, not the ego of the one funding it." Nicholas smiled lightly, his eyes downcast. It was the smile of someone who finally understood his place. "It's in your hands." Months later, Zoe became the executive director of the Voices Without Borders program, based in Manhattan. She wore sober suits, her hair elegantly tied, and spoke at international conferences about linguistic justice, racial equity, and social mobility through education. But even at the top, she never stopped visiting public schools, listening to tired mothers, students crying in the bathroom because they didn't feel enough. "I've been there," she would say, "and I'm still there. The difference is, now I've got a key in my hand." She went from overlooked maid to a bridge between worlds, but she refused titles like hero or miracle. For Zoe, what she did now was just an extension of what she had always been. Someone who insists on the truth, even when it doesn't have a microphone. At the program's official launch, Nicholas stood in the back of the auditorium, applauding quietly. He didn't go on stage. He didn't give a speech. And he didn't need to. She did. And when she spoke for many. But not even she expected who would show up at the end of that event. Among the quiet guests, a face from the past watched from a distance. Familiar, but different. Someone who never forgot the woman who made him listen for the first time. The morning of the inauguration event started grey in Manhattan, with low clouds reflecting off the windows of the 7-story building that now housed the headquarters of the Voices Without Borders Foundation. Inside the main auditorium, the atmosphere was completely different, vibrant, full of anticipation, with young voices speaking different languages, laughing nervously, holding their name badges like they were holding the keys to a new life. The space, wide and modern, was packed. Seats filled with teachers, students, mothers wearing colourful scarves, fathers with calloused hands, community leaders, and even former students of Zoe. There was diversity there, not as a marketing image, but as a living reality. The murmur faded when her name was announced. Zoe walked to the stage with calm steps. She wore a modest navy blue dress and a light beige blazer. Her hair was down, slightly wavy. In her hand, only a single sheet, and in her voice, nothing but the truth. She took a deep breath, looked at the crowd, and for a second, seemed to travel back in time. "I used to be invisible." The phrase hung in the air like a long, firm note. Not because I didn't have a voice, but because no one wanted to listen. She looked to the front rows, where young people of all backgrounds watched her with wide, attentive eyes. Black girls with braids, Latino boys with headphones hanging around their necks, Asian teenagers with worn-out backpacks, white boys from rural towns with patched jackets. Each of them carried their own battle. But they were all there because of her. For a long time, I believed the language I spoke would define my worth. I thought if I learned the language of the powerful, I would have a place. But I discovered that it's not the language that gives you worth. She paused, and then, with a clear and emotional voice, she concluded, "It's the courage to keep speaking when no one wants to listen." The applause didn't come right away, not because there was no emotion, but because everyone there was absorbing those words like a truth that hurt and healed at the same time. Zoe then walked to the edge of the stage and looked at the audience with sweetness and firmness. "If I'm here today, it's not because I was accepted. It's because I insisted. And now that I've walked through this door, my duty is not to close it." She raised the sheet of paper slightly and concluded with simplicity, like someone writing the period at the end of a letter that was way too long. Whoever climbs has the duty to leave doors open. That's when the applause came, long, heartfelt, proud, not for glamour, not for vanity, but because everyone there knew they were witnessing someone who hadn't been pushed to the top. She had climbed there herself, step by step, with open wounds and truth as her rope. In the back, standing near the side exit, Nicholas watched silently. He wore a simple shirt, no jacket. His hair was a bit longer, his beard grown out. There were no security guards, no stairs around him, just him. A man transformed, maybe not in every way, but in the way that mattered most, in how he looked at others. When Zoe stepped down from the stage, their eyes met. She didn't smile. Neither did he. But there was a brief nod, full of recognition. It wasn't romantic love. It was something rarer, harder to build, respect, and reparation. Zoe continued among the young people surrounding her, listening to every story, every dream. She was a leader now, but she would never stop being the woman who dared to speak when no one wanted to listen. And because of that, her voice had become the key that would open many other doors. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? From 0 to 10, what rating does it deserve in your opinion? Leave your answer in the comments. I'd love to know how this journey touched you. If you liked it, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this one. And before you go, I've picked another moving story that's going to touch you even deeper. I'll see you there.